Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. You're watching India Tonight with me, Sumita. Kareer. Our focus on the show is on dragon-elephant tango. Ladies and gentlemen, as India and China celebrate 75 years of bilateral ties, and Chinese President Xi Jinping tells President Draupadi Murmu that China and India's relationship should take the form of a dragon-elephant tango. Remember, this is coming in after India and China have started normalization of ties, starting with border disputes redressal, and even saw several key visits and engagements starting last year. But there is a trade angle involved in this equation, at least this time around. So let me give you some data that we've collated from trade body GTRI. Now, China is India's largest trading partner, with trade surpassing $100 billion in 2023-24. But India imports much more from China as compared to its exports to China. India's trade deficit with China has been growing. In fact, in 2022 itself, the trade deficit figure stood at over $100 billion. Given the fact that Donald Trump is about to impose reciprocal tariffs the world over, and of course China has been reeling under some impact as far as the United States decision to impose 20% of additional tariffs on China is concerned, the big question is, can India trust China? Can India take advantage of a changed world and tilt the India-China equation in its favor? Well, to discuss those and many more perspectives are now joined by Kalpit Mankikar, China Fellow, ORF. Thank you very much, Mr. Mankikar, for joining us here on ET Now. All right, then we are also joined by Ashok Sajanar, former ambassador. Thank you very much, sir, for joining us here on ET Now. Let me come to you first, Mr. Mankikar. Now, the Chinese ambassador to India recently in an interview stating that China-India relations are at a pivotal moment of progress. There could be collaboration in various sectors. This is, of course, like I said, coming just as Trump's reciprocal tariffs are to be imposed. China is already reeling under that decision of 20% of additional tariffs. So is this elephant-dragon tango that Xi Jinping talked about, is this bonhomie for real, or is it strategic in nature?
I think, firstly, thank you so much for inviting me to your show. Now, I am looking at this from a very, very different. I'm looking at this from a very different lens. I think, firstly, let's try to understand there are two things. There is a parallel track going on. India and China are both trying to normalize, and very cautiously, India is trying to normalize its relations with China. Now, having said that, in January, India and China both decided to kind of resume things like the Kailash Mansarovar Yatra, the issues regarding trans-river cooperation, sharing of hydrological data, and direct flights. Now, having said that, I think we have to be also aware. I mean, you spoke about trust. The army chief himself, the Indian Army chief himself, has raised this issue of trust. I mean, when we've had disengagement on the border, we have not finished. I mean, we have not closed the loop with de-escalation. The government's assessment, the army's assessment, is that the LAC is sensitive. I mean, it is stable, but the conditions are sensitive. I think this is one of the main things that China has to build trust on. The other is China's territorial expansionism. We have these, in January, China constituted new administrative counties in Ladakh with subsumed areas, which is already under its control. So I think this is one of the key things where, China has deliberately and time and again tried to destabilize or try to, bring the border to the fore. So, yeah.
Right, Mr. Mankikar, but wouldn't you agree that geopolitics cannot really be divorced from economics? And I also mentioned the figure that India and China really have, so far as the bilateral trade is concerned, that even surpasses India's trade with the United States. Let me take the point across to Mr. Sajanar. The fact that Donald Trump's policy on tariffs has unleashed bilateralism in trade, which is why India is also securing FTAs with several countries as well versus multilateralism earlier. Don't you think it becomes all the more crucial for China to secure its trade? And wouldn't you say that it is geared towards securing its trade partnerships?
Yeah, thank you very much, Sumita. You're right. I think as far as China is concerned, it appears to be feeling the heat of Trump 2.0, definitely much more than what India is doing. Because, if you look at both goods and services, United States is India's largest trading partner. We have a trade surplus, but definitely not of the measure that China has. China has about $400 billion of trade surplus with the United States. It might have come down a little bit in recent years, but it is very, very substantial. It is the largest trade surplus. As far as India is concerned, we have about both goods and services, we have about $35 billion or so. And we are working together with the United States. We have at least an agreement on paper that the first tranche of the bilateral trade agreement is going to be, we'll be able to finalize by September, October this year. So I think as far as India and United States are concerned, we are moving according to a certain plan. But as far as China is concerned, I think that has its back to the wall. When Trump was campaigning, he had said he would impose 60% tariffs, additional tariffs on Chinese imports on the first day. Of course, he is not met with that. There are mixed signals that are going from the United States to China, but still it is, he's imposed 10 plus 10%, 20% tariffs, additional tariffs on Chinese goods. So China definitely is feeling the heat much more than India is, and it is very keen that it should be able to enter into some sort of, diversify its trading arrangements, its trading patterns, so that, it's able to provide a unified sort of a front to Trump when, for instance, tomorrow the reciprocal tariffs are introduced. And maybe that is the reason why we see that the Chinese ambassador is particularly over keen. In all his interview that has come in Global Times, you would have seen there is no reference whatsoever to the fact that the situation at the borders needs to be settled, that there has been some sort of disengagement, but de-escalation and, moving back of the troops in the borders. There's no reference to that at all. There's only talking about trade and economic cooperation. That is important. India should also try to take benefit and advantage of the large Chinese economy. But we've seen that China has so many non-tariff barriers to export of Indian goods that we have a very huge trade deficit with China. Sumita.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Ambassador Sajjanar, for putting the context so beautifully. And of course, in terms of the kind of equations that China is looking at, we also saw the visit of Bangladesh's chief advisor, Mohammad Yunus, to China, where he made the kind of statements that he did with respect to India. And that really begs me to ask the question once again that can India trust China? But we'll come to that point in just a bit. I want to take off from where you said, Ambassador Sajjanar, on collaboration between the two countries. So, Mr. Mankikar, where do you think the two countries can collaborate with with this new equation that is driven by Donald Trump's tariff threats and, of course, disruption of global supply chains? How do you think India can move this relationship in its favor?
I think, Sumita, we need to understand one thing. See, there is one thing. There are issues regarding national sovereignty. So I think this is something which we cannot compromise on. And I think it's important for us to understand the kind of actions of China, the kind of actions China has undertaken in the past. We have issues regarding the sovereignty and the territorial integrity with regarding CPEC. What happens to that? And I think China's own expanding claims in Arunachal, where we see time and again, you've had China put out different maps that show a great portion of Arunachal within China. So I think till these issues are laid to rest, to kind of move forward on an economic engagement would be fraught with risks, because look at what Chinese strategists themselves have been writing regarding the disengagement process. One of the Chinese scholars has written that India is bleeding financially. in terms of its military deployment, and hence it is very eager to make amends with China. So I think if this is the kind of mindset that the Chinese have, I think we have to be a little more circumspect. Over to you.
Right. So you're stating that we have to be a bit circumspect. But Mr. Mankikar, what about economic sovereignty? I mentioned this figure just a short while back about the trade imbalance between India and China, over $100 billion a year. How do you really see that?
So I mean, see, it's nice for China to talk about the elephant dragon tango. I mean, this has been going on. This has been uh, uh, since the time President Trump is back in the U.S. China is trying to sort of swing back to India. Now I think China. The problem is that China looks at India from an economic prism. There is a prism of competition. Hence, the issue of the elephant dragon tango it's a nice concept, but what about China willfully blocking the transfer of technology, equipment, and personnel when it comes to infrastructure projects that are going on in India? So I think they have to come very clear on the intent.
Right. Right. Right, Mr. Mankikar. Ambassador Sajjanar, let me also ask you about this, economic tie-up. How can India leverage this opportunity to shift the equation in its favor, given that now US also wants a counter to China in this region? And of course, Trump has been speaking rather favorably of India. That puts additional pressure on China and, of course, several sectors that it is operating in vis-a-vis India, like manufacturing.
Yeah, Sumita, that's a very important point. I think as far as India is concerned, we have to be certain that our most consequential partnership in our quest for Viksit Bharat 2047 is the United States. Whatever it might be, as far as Mr. Trump is concerned, the tariff pressure, the Trump effect that is concerned. Of course, I also agree with the view that while lowering of tariffs in certain sectors is going to be beneficial to India because, it'll help us to become more competitive. It'll also help us to become, part of the global value chains and the global supply chains, integrate ourselves into the global economy. So to that extent, but of course, we have to be selective, not sort of, listen to all that Mr. Trump is saying, but see what is in our advantage and use this pressure, use this challenge as an opportunity. That having been said, I think as far as China is concerned, all our sensitive sectors, whether it is the telecom sector, the power sector, any of the other major infrastructure, we need to keep them out of China's reach. But, both India and China are big neighbors, and we have to have stable relations with each other. And in that context, if we can take advantage of the big Chinese market next to us, I think definitely we should try to make use of it. So far, we have been, we have reduced the import of finished goods from China. We are getting only intermediate goods. We are getting only inputs for our own manufacturing, which we can, put into the export market and so on and so forth. So while the trade deficit might be large, but
right. Right, but Ambassador Sajjanar, let me interject you here because you made a very important point that India can take advantage of several in these sectors, and you did mention about manufacturing. There are several companies that have been looking at a China plus one model and looking at India to set up their supply chains. I mean, India clearly is positioned as a potential alternative. Do you think India, as of now, is ready to step into that role, or are there fundamental challenges that India must overcome at this point in time to take advantage of all of these opportunities that lie in front of us?
Yeah, there are 2 points, Sumita. The point that you made about China plus one is very important. We have not been able to take advantage of that, in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic, when there was sort of, weaponization of the supply chains by China and many of the global entities. They said that they are going to sort of new, manufacturing initiatives that they have, they will not be in China, but they'll be in other countries. That went to Vietnam, that went to Malaysia, that went to Mexico, Bangladesh. Not many of them came to India. I think today we are in a much better position. We could be in an even better position by having, ease of doing business, introducing reforms, labor reforms, land reforms, in terms of dispute settlement. There's a whole host of areas where we can work. But there's the other point also, that the Chinese market itself is a large market. It's a big market. And, our exports into that market have been stymied because China has imposed either, tariff or non-tariff barriers on Indian exports to that country. And I think this is what the Chinese ambassador referred to, that, we can look at increasing India's exports. You would remember, Sumita, when the first Wuhan summit took place in 2018, and Prime Minister Modi had gone to Wuhan, and there were a whole list of items that we wanted China to import. Those are items that India exports to the whole world. But China doesn't accept it because of its non-tariff barriers. So, there are two things. One is getting investments into India under the China plus one investment strategies of many of the global companies. And the other is reducing our trade deficit with China, but increasing our exports to China. And of course, there has also been talk, you would recall, in the economic survey last year, that we should try to get more Chinese investments, of course, in sectors in which we want them, and, non-sensitive sectors where we can have greater production, greater employment, greater push to our export efforts. So I think there are a number of areas in which we can work to maximize, while keeping in mind that, trust is not a word that should come as far as relations between India and China are concerned. Trust normally does not feature in foreign policy, in foreign relations, but definitely will not be a factor as far as India-China relations are concerned. Sumita.
And absolutely, India has to be strategic about its interests, Ambassador Sajjanar, because now you also have a Donald Trump 2.0 administration that many experts like yourselves have earlier stated that it is going to be transactional, it is going to be more practical so far as handling its foreign policy and its ties with other countries is concerned. Let me come to you, Mr. Mankikar. What do you think is China's long-term strategy for India, and what conditions need to be met for India to feel that it could move with a certain level of trust with China going forward?
See, Sumita, long-term strategy of China is very clear. China looks at becoming the hegemon of Asia. It's in a competition with to displace the US in Asia, and it wants to become the hegemon of Asia. Now, typically, such kind of a behavior you have, when there is a rising hegemon, he looks at trying to settle scores with the next challenger, as it were. And India is the next challenger for China. It looks at India. China looks at India from a prism of competition. Also, if you see, for a long time, India had issues regarding its economy, and now with the Indian economy on the rebound, this is greater. There is a greater anxiety within China. Yeah.
Right. So you're suggesting that there is, of course, some sort of greater anxiety within China. We'll have to see how that really pans out post April the 2nd, when Donald Trump finally announces his tariff-related decisions and how they really impact India. But Ambassador Sajjanar, one final question before we wrap up this discussion. Even if India were to take China on face value, where do you really see this partnership headed, especially from a security point of view? Mostly because there have been concerns previously with respect to data and privacy, and even the country's AI model DeepSeek has been flagged off by countries such as the United States. So how can India balance its economic independence on China and its security concerns? How does that move?
Yeah, as far as security is concerned, India cannot take China at face value because, China has not given up on its claims of 93,000 square kilometers of, Arunachal Pradesh, claiming it as South Tibet. and, putting a string of pearls around India, reaching out, to all our neighbors, whether it's Bangladesh, you yourself, Sumita, mentioned about Muhammad Yunus's visit to Bangladesh recently, or it is Maldives, or it is China-Pakistan economic corridor. So, as far as security is concerned, we have to continue to strengthen ourselves economically, militarily, infrastructure in the borders. As far as our external engagements are concerned, we cannot, be complacent as far as our northern borders, 3,488 kilometers with China are concerned, because China wants not only to be the hegemon in Asia, but it wants to be the hegemon in the world. So, while it calls for a multipolar world, it is working towards a unipolar Asia. It does not want to see, so this move by China, what the Chinese ambassador has said, it's a very tactical move. It is only for the time being. It is not, strategic or visionary or a long term. In any case, I think it wants to deal with it, take care of the situation as it prevails today, so that the blow that comes its way from Mr. Trump, that can be softened to some extent by, trying to build this sort of front against the pushback that it is receiving from America, from Donald Trump. But it does not have anything in terms of long-term having good relations or better relations with India. So India has to be very mindful of working with China to the extent that it helps to for its own advantage, for its own purpose. But I think it is India will have to be very, very cautious and think twice before it takes even a single step moving forward. But having said that, there are possibilities, and I think we can work towards to our advantage in the coming days in taking our relations forward with China. Sumita.
Absolutely. Ambassador Sajanar, I couldn't have asked for a better conclusion. Thank you very much for putting everything into perspective. And thank you very much, Mr. Mankikar, for joining us and sharing your thoughts with us. It's indeed a story